giant seed cracks was looking for what the parents were.
Sure.
And even further back, if I knew more about the grandparents, if I'm looking for a certain trait, it was really fun to grow. I've had the privilege of growing hundreds and hundreds of seeds of Chem 95, in which with Chem 95, the most recessive is going to be one that grows like an OG, so it has long internodal spacing, grows like Chem, but has the OG smell. Because most of them, when you breed with Chem is very, very dominant.
It's super dominant.
It's great for commercial viability, but it's one of those things where I've popped hundreds of seeds of this, and I've only seen a couple that had that propensity. In which I see it, and I'm like, oh, that's the one. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, and here's the thing. It's a numbers game, right? And if you're trying to get to the outliers, and it also depends on how certain people are breeding. Some people are breeding to really reduce variability, and some people are trying to give max variability out there and say, look, I'm just throwing you a huge pallet, pick what you want out of there. But in general, right? People want unicorns, people want outliers. But what's funny is people think a big seed pop is 100 beans or even a couple hundred beans or maybe 1,000. But if you're really talking about something like a wheat trial, you're talking 1 to 2 million individual species they start with. That's then reduced down to about 10 or 20 over 7 or 10 years, and then they're put out the field trials for another 10 years.
That's
the real number.
My buddy Justin Jones, one of the owners of Dank here in town, he's a Camus Park.
Gotcha, yeah.
They did trials up in Oregon. The valley that he lives in Oregon is one of the largest areas where they test stuff in the world. And I want to say they tested 1 million hemp seeds. He has the only certified hemp seeds, I believe, in the world, or at least he did at the time.
Sure.
But yeah, just like you said, those are the kind of had to crack 1 million seeds.
Those are the kind of numbers to be statistically speaking, because that's what I realized when I went through breeding in college. One, it was a very, very difficult class because it ain't no little Punnett square, folks. You know what I mean? It's not big A, little A, big A, big, little B kind of crap. It's very, very complex, and even the way that genes are turned on and off, so it's a probability thing, right? So statistics are a huge part of breeding when you talk about it on an ag scale. So, reality is I don't look down on anybody. I chuck pollen in my life for sure.
Oh, dude.
Now, and it's fun. Making seeds is fun.
And
making seeds is fun.
Well, and it's funny because when I was back east, I posed to Dane, and I would pose to any of our listeners this question. I challenge you to find me, other than GMO, I challenge you to find me a progeny that is better than the parents. And I've had people, and I challenge my listeners, go out there, find a progeny that's better than the parents. GMO, in my opinion, is better than the parents. Nothing that anybody breeds with GMO is better than GMO, but you look at the OG crosses, the sour D crosses, all these things, and someone made a point to me, and they said, oh, well, nobody's bred anything like those ones are better than most of what they've done. But the reality is, they were all bag seeds. Like, none of that stuff was intentional.
Well, which is the new. So you look at the foundations, all the things that I originally said, aside from GMO, which was selected, that was bred by Mammoth Seeds and selected by Skunk Master Flex in Michigan.
And still just an absolute rock star.
I couldn't agree with you more. So good that it became a bit of a building block and a foundation strain itself. Now, I can say things like we've had in this Circle the Garlic Cocktail, for example, that's been going phenomenal strain. Won the Florida Cup. Shout out to Chops Flower Shop winning the Florida Cup down there with it.
Yeah.
And the reality is it is a incredibly strong strain. Looks better in the bag. All these things. Yeah. But I still prefer GMO. It's got that funk.
Yeah.
And the unicorn poop, it's got better, it's better bag appeal, and it still has that funk that GMO has. But then again, GMO extract's better than anything ever. And part of that structure.
That's what I say. It ticks all the boxes. The only thing that GMO usually doesn't tick the box on is how long it takes. But, pro tip, I've grown hundreds, if not thousands of pounds of GMO at this point. Pro tip, if you use the winter frost, you do a shorter flush time. And that's one of the things when we talk about knowing your genetics, that's exactly what this episode is about, is you'll run that to day 62 before you start flushing, intending on a 70-day harvest.
Sure.
So a lot of times what I'll do is I will get it to a point where I'm satisfied with how big it's gotten, and then I'll hit it last 3 days.
Yep.
When you're doing smaller receptacles, now that a lot of people have moved down to these 1.5 gallon, 8-inch block
Things happen fast.
you can utilize a shorter flush time. You know, and again,
But to me, that's also being a gardener, right? Being there, being in the room, giving it the, at least 3 waterings of winter frost that second to last week, and then chilling on the flush, watching it. When's it ready to go? Now, granted, we're talking connoisseur style. When you talk about, a commercial style, they're here on day 56.
What's interesting about that is hanging out with you guys is that the GMO goes very long, and it's not bad. You pull it early with the winter frost. It's not like it makes it worse. It's like it brings up different notes. We argue Jaren's GMO might be some of the best GMO, and he takes it 2 weeks early.
Easily 2 weeks.
He takes it way earlier than me.
Easily 2 weeks
And
early.
I can tell you right now,
Who do without winter frost?
Jaren's expression on GMO is completely different than anybody else's I've seen, in which it really emphasizes that onion.
Yeah.
That onion flavor, in which that's one of the things I love the most. But it is really, really unique. And again, a lot of this is, when we say knowing your cultivar, part of that is knowing where you live, knowing your environment.
There's a lot of things.
There's a lot that goes.
And in fact, that's a beautiful segue. Really,
well, you did say you lose a little bit of weight when you do that, but no quality.
That would
That's
be
interesting.
And it would be a lie to say if it doesn't have 2 extra weeks to bulk, it's not going to. And by the way, I'm not saying it's light or small or anything like that. I just always tell people, hey, but guess what? You get a whole nother run in within a year. Where's your weight at now?
There you go.
Where's your weight at?
What's your intention? Are you growing for flour? Are you growing for hash?
And we're going to actually, and I think
you're growing for hash, are you growing for BHO, are you growing for rosin? Because the way
that matters.
The way you're gonna treat that product is completely different as far as your post processing and even the times you're gonna take it. Because I know Nick Lahoe out at Phenotype Farmer, he takes those rooms, he gets them down to like 60 degrees on harvest. He gets the hallways down to 60 degrees. So how you deal with all that?
Yeah, and if you can, that'd be awesome. But again, I like to say all the time, there's ideal, which is things like that, and then there's real. And not everybody gets to deal in the ideal.
We'll actually discuss that when we go through.
Looks like we got a little visitor. We got the puppy coming in. So I will say, hey,
dogs in studio.
Yay, dogs.
We got dogs. We got kids. It's chaos.
So one thing I would say
is
is
restricted for the dog for sure.
And I wanted to use this as a segue into it because part of knowing your genetics is place of origin. Now, you can talk about things like that. A lot of times it's not talked about it as much in the plant that we deal with, but you hear about it in like potatoes. Like, let's say you have a problem in potatoes. Where do you go to fix it? In other words, where do you go try and find some unique genes to take care? Well, you go to its place of origin, which happens to be Peru. Peru over the centuries have literally cultivated many different thousands of different varieties of potatoes. The place of origin of apples is Kazakhstan, actually. So that's always kind of interesting too, to be like, and that again, when we talk about knowing your genetics, it really depends on how far back you want to go. But even knowing things like place of origin, if possible, to trace it back to, is of value to know.
Well, something we discuss with a lot of folks is knowing that origin also helps you. A lot of genetics have vigor. They either have seed vigor, or they have, or they just have vigor from where. Like if you nowadays, a lot of people are getting clones sent to them from certain areas, in which, by the way, that's all totally legal per the Hemp Act. But if you have seeds that were bred in Seattle and the parents are Seattle plants and stuff like that.
Yeah, obviously, place of origin is a value, and like, you'd even say, where was it bred? Like, okay, we just talked about Mamico seeds. Okay, so that was bred in Spain, actually, then selected in Michigan, and now it's been widely distributed around the world. Well, I'm here to tell you that genotype plus environment, which happens to be latitude, altitude, humidity, all these different things, right? Even if you're running a controlled environment, there's still other things that play, right?
Yeah, I was just on Instagram and I saw someone's page and they had same cultivar, same building, everything, HPS LEDs.
Yep.
And different rooms. That's the only thing that was different. But the expression between the two, you wouldn't know it's the same plant.
I was just at Ideal Cannabis, and they're doing a number of different trials, and even trialing different LED companies next to each other. Exact same genetics on the exact same spots in the rooms. All of that, I mean, really solid trials. And even LED company to LED company, you see different expressions.
There's such, with HBSs for the longest time, even, if you ran a DLI or a Gavita or a Lumina, it's all the same bulb. It's all the same bulb.
Right.
Whereas nowadays, everybody's got their tuning. We discuss it so much about binning with the diodes and, the way a lot of these people get the oranges, the combination of whites and red on the stack. So it's it's just wild, all the different and there's so much information out there nowadays that there's almost too much information. You really just got to get your plants under them. And one of the things, that's on my list of topics to discuss is selections that were originally made under HBSs.
Talk about this a lot.
They're probably going to grow better under HBSs as much as, a lot of these gelatos, these cakes and stuff like that. They grow best under the LEDs. Now, am I saying
because they were selected?
Yeah,
almost.
Am I saying there's not a guy out there who grows fire sour D under LEDs? Sure, I'm not saying that guy doesn't exist, but the truth of the matter is, these plants that were selected under HPSs, they like HPS.
Well, when people say that, I can't find the old sour D, what I say is, no. You can't find sour D ran under HPS with GH all pro.
Yes, that's how we did it back in 1999.
Right, that's what you can't find. And by the way, this is not good or bad, and sometimes you might even find an expression that you like better on the other side. I mean, there's no question about that. I even have always said, too, even bringing in verified genetics to Colorado and under LED and all this kind of stuff, even though I know it's completely verified, I still have to sift through those. There's always a sifting process for your room and your environment, whether you're literally starting.
You go over to your buddy's house and it was banging, and you're like, bro, it doesn't look like that in my house.
Well, but you're also running a little bit different, and it's just what it is. So that's still a sifting process. Even if you got it from your buddy down the street, it's still how does it work in your environment. So you can either back all the way up and do it with seeds and sift from the top down, or even if you get into this zone and you're getting clones, you still have to sift and see how it works for yours. I've had plenty of times you go, I know that's legit genetics. Everything else, it just doesn't quite work right for my environment. So
let's go over
without further ado.
Let's go over some of the things that we've noticed over the years that will affect that you're going to want to just take notes. The kid who used to work for me, Austin, unbelievably good about taking notes. I could go ask him, hey, do you remember Cushman's back in 2019? What is it? And he's got the notes. So take good notes is the first thing I would say to any of you.
Well, and that goes for even deficiencies too. I tell you guys, don't try and fix things. Take good notes. Take notes through the process. But like something like
deficiency or
well, you're right. True. But why don't you start with just kind of talking about a couple of the variables that we tend to see where the genes slip themselves out.
So, one of the first ones, I'm actually going to move the first one down because it makes more sense a little bit later. But for, a couple of the big things that I definitely noticed are the frequency of feeding and the type of juice that they like, and the pH that they're at. Those all kind of correlate with each other.
So, I mean, you got some that are heavy feeders, you got some that are light feeders, you got some that it doesn't seem to do what you throw at it. They're going to eat it up, they're going to love it. And then you have some that are just like,
I used to have guys out in California who would do the SFV.
Yep.
And the SFV, they would do, let's say 45 plants per 4x4, and they would just root them, put them in blocks and flip them, because a lot of OGs, they really don't like wet feed.
Nope.
Their root zone, their rhizosphere can tend to be a bit thinner, much like the top growth, and the top growth on a lot of the OGs can be spindly, can be very, the SFV is the one I use the most example because it's almost like a grapevine.
And if it's like that up top,
and it's going
to be like that down below too.
We'll talk about pruning methods a little bit later, but a lot of that stuff that you would take off on some other plants, you're going to leave it on those OGs because that stuff still all fills out to be like golf ball size buds.
Sure.
So, I mean, a lot of those things,
I definitely, for me in my system, one of the things that always kind of separated them out was the wet feed thing.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
I did regular feeding, but it's 2 floods a day. It's a bucket and bucket system, just an ebb and flow bucket system that, like, I don't have a lot of specificity that can be done there. I mean, it's old school, just flood and drain basically. So,
Well, and that's
the OGs at times, or even the chems like that. Chem D. It's like I ran it a few times and it just didn't like. But again, think about it. What were most people doing in the '90s? They were hand watering into soil or peat moss.
or the ebbs.
Or the ebbs.
Were popular.
Sure. So you have ones that, like, literally you can never overwater, and then you have ones that for the better part of their life and where they were most likely selected from was in more of a hand watering situation. So again, that's why I think it's always worth noting all these things, but also taking good notes. I think that's a great thing to say, because these are all not hard and fast rules. Put the genetics in your grow and take good notes.
I mean, I'll have it in my room where there's certain genetics. One of the big things I try to feed, regardless of whether I'm at home, definitely in the garden. One of the things I've said for a long time is a lot of people pick their receptacle size, especially at home, based on how much they feel like water.
Oh, yeah.
And irrigation's a tough thing.
Oh, yeah.
Who wants to go pay a bunch of money to irrigate, to irrigate their plants? In which we have determined through a lot of research that the best way to really feed your plants is to pulse feed them. So you're having, and what I like to tell folks is have the smallest receptacle that you can comfortably get away with missing a watering.
Sure.
So that's really in which I would recommend. A lot of times I recommend 3 gallons, but you see a lot of people coming over to these, 8-inch blocks, 1.5 inch, in which I've definitely seen people grow the same size plants.
Yep.
The reality
just on a razor edge.
that 3-gallon pot is giving you more of an insurance policy, but you're going to want to figure out how much do these things drink, how often do I need to feed them, and like I said, in my room, I'll have OGs in 2-gallon pots next to, a GMO that's in a 7-gallon pot, and they'll both be getting the fed every day, and so, and really, that's really what I try to do is make sure that I'm feeding my plants as often as possible, and that way,
Without overwatering.
without overwatering,
Which answers the pulse watering, right? We're not talking about saturation watering, guys. We're talking about short intervals, multiple times a day. That would be essentially pulse feeding. Now, another thing that people always talk about is that how tough are plants in the sense from a herming standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Like if they actually if they get a little bit of a light leak, if they get a little bit overfed,
the GMOs, the chems, the sour Ds, the cookies, they're always going to have a propensity to have those issues. When we talk about pruning techniques, those are all ones where you definitely want to skirt up a little bit higher because that's where it's going to happen. It's going to happen in that under canopy.
And you're going there
It's going to happen in week 3.
Yeah, and it'll happen real fast. You'll look in there one day and
you'll be like,
holy shit.
those bananas, like full-blown bananas.
Yeah.
So again, part of the and that's the knowing your cultivar. That's what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode when it comes to knowing the parents, knowing the grandparents. If you know you have some. You have some candy in your genetics. If you know you have some Gorilla Glue in your genetics. If you know there's some cookies in your genetics. Scared it up, baby.
Yeah, scared it up for sure. And we've all had a herm there, here or there, and a lot of times one little banana poking out. We've got so many of these polyploids. Like that's not something to absolutely freak out about. It's only when I get that
And one caveat I would say,
real ball dropping.
I've had genetics where they showed some issues, nothing crazy, but they showed some issues the first time. I cloned them, and I never saw those issues again.
And I don't have an explanation for that. Sometimes I feel like plants just settle in a little bit.
Yeah.
Like that garlic cocktail, for example.
Yeah.
First 2 runs I had out there, you just didn't really, and I didn't really change anything, but it just seemed to just relax and get
Well,
used
and
to
again, that goes back to if it's in a new environment, it's got different stresses.
Yep.
And one thing we need to remember is they're annuals. And so being annuals, what do they want to do? They want to figure out a way to survive. How do you survive? Some male flowers. So it's right. It is just
That's
nature,
in their genetics.
nature doing nature.
Well, keep in mind, guys, these really were, they were two different plants, right? So